Joining us now live is one of our regular chats, Senator Rex Patrick, one of Centre Alliance senators who's joined the next parliament. Thank you for your time. Today we're talking about APRA report from Graham Samuel. It's been quite scathing on the regulator's role in enforcing just prudent behaviour among the banks in particular. What's your read of this report?
Oh, look, it's a terrible report for APRA. It's a terrible report for the state of regulation enforcement here in Australia, particularly in obviously the financial sector. Look, with comments like variable leadership, culture problems, lack of transparency, lack of contestability, I'm of the very strong view that that the chair has to go. I know he's just been reappointed. He's been there a long time. I come from a Navy background where the captain of a ship is responsible for any grounding or any collisions or any incidents. And in my view, there's only one course of action to take at this point in time. We have to look at the top leadership of APRA and look to replace it.
So, well, that's going a lot further than any other political response today, Rex Patrick. Do you not recognise that APRA, at least in terms of the risk management of the fundamentals of our financial system, say for example the banking system during the global financial crisis, that it was part of the defence against a collapse of that system in that period and has remained a strong steward in that sense?
Look, there have been areas where they have done well, but when we're talking about things like leadership variability, lack of transparency, we've got lack of contestability, and basically the Royal Commissioner pointing out that they were not doing their job, and that rests with the leadership of the organisation. The chair is on a salary of more than $800,000 a year. You can't sit in a position like that and simply enjoy the reward without taking responsibility for your actions.
You're quite a powerful voice in the parliament now. The government relies on you to pass any legislation that's contended by Labor. Is this something you're going to be raising as a priority with the Treasurer?
Well, it's certainly something I will raise with the Treasurer, but it also, there are opportunities like estimates to explore this. But I think this also goes to, Mr Frydenberg's leadership ability as well. When you have clear leadership problems in an organisation, you can't simply bat on. You have to make changes. Well,
that's a big call. We'll get some further reaction to that later. But you've gone, as I say, further than most political reactions to that particular report.
Can I just add that, I said the same thing when James Shipton took over the ASIC. I think that was a very good move, and he's started to make some changes in relation to ASIC. So okay. This is not an unusual call. I think where people are not performing, they have to move on.
All right, let's. Well, you mentioned your former career in the Navy. You were a submariner. We're now seeing suggestions, I think they've been around for some time, but renewed claims that our submarine fleet could be obsolete when they come into service in the 2030s. What's your sense of that, given these are going to be constructed in your backyard there, essentially in Adelaide?
Yeah, look, I don't think this goes to an issue of construction, it goes to an issue of design. We've got a $50 billion acquisition program with these submarines. That's a hugely expensive program. The program carries significant schedule risk, and it also carries significant cost risk. And now we're finding out that there are elements of this submarine that are just, in some sense, very ordinary. So one of the things that the Navy has indicated is that our future submarines will have lead-acid battery cells. Now, in 2035, when these submarines are delivered, the only other place you're going to be able to find lead-acid cells will be in a museum. There are Japanese submarines now wandering around at sea that have lithium-ion batteries. Most people would be familiar with those. They are high-performance batteries. Energy is everything in a conventional submarine. It determines whether or not you can commence a mission, when you have to aboard. It provides you with escape options. It's an extremely important element. That's just one element of the submarine where there is clear lack of vision. This is not a huge risk to move to lithium-ion batteries, and that's what should happen.
There's an obvious risk there with the batteries, which I think you've addressed well, but on the broader idea of investing in submarines that will then become outdated, is that not always a risk that you run with big investments like submarines, that the technology will date in the time it takes to build them?
Well, that's one of the problems with what Australia has done, is it's embarked on an extremely lengthy program at huge cost. Had we gone down the pathway of getting some sort of off-the-shelf submarine that you could build here in Australia, those sorts of submarines can be delivered in a relatively short time frame. We could have ASC here in Adelaide building submarines within a year or two, and those submarines are far less expensive and could be updated, and you can react to strategic circumstances, you can react to technological circumstances. That's the problem when you embark on a multi-decade, hugely expensive program.
There's also, Rex, Patrick, a view, isn't there, I've seen over recent years expressed that submarines full stop could be obsolete within the next few decades because the gains that are being made on detection are outpacing that in terms of the stealth capabilities.
Look, I'm not entirely sure that is correct. We have submarines working at sea at the moment. Look, one of the things that submarines do in peacetime is keep a watch on things. They do collect intelligence. They're able to go into areas that perhaps other assets can't. They can watch things that are going on and people don't realise they are there. I'm not suggesting, I can't suggest that the Royal Australian Navy does that, but that's a common thing that submarines do in peacetime, and one would argue, in some sense, that is their most important role.
And just finally, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare has released its data on the top causes of death, and for those aged 15 to 44, again, the leading cause of death is suicide. Do you think the government's doing enough now? I know the Prime Minister's announced a zero target, but it needs the funding behind it to make it happen.
Well, yes, it does. Look, any time there is a suicide, it's tragic. It's tragic for individuals, it's tragic for families, it's tragic for communities, and it's unnecessary, and we do need to act. Now, look, the Prime Minister has appointed a National Suicide Prevention Officer, early days yet. Look, we have to start looking at this very seriously. We've got issues with suicide, but not just from an age perspective. We've got suicides in increasing numbers in regional areas, amongst Aboriginals. This is a huge issue and it has to be addressed.
Senator, we appreciate your time as always. We'll talk to you soon.